When Karen showed up at my door waving a $5,000 fine for unlawful hunting, I couldn't help but grin. What she didn't realize was that her little notice had just triggered a series of events that would leave the entire HOA in complete chaos. They believed they had control over every inch of this neighborhood, but there's one thing they overlooked: property law. Once I started looking into the so-called community trails they strutted through every morning, I uncovered a truth that could flip the entire situation on its head. If you've ever wanted to put an overreaching HOA in its place, this tale is for you. Also, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I'd love to see how far our Anadroma family reaches. When I moved to Green Valley Estates 2 years ago, I wasn't planning to ruffle any feathers. After spending 8 years in the military and another 5 crammed inside tech offices in Seattle, all I wanted was some peace and breathing room. I'm Mason Holloway, 38, working remotely as a software engineer for a cybersecurity firm. The job pays well, offers flexibility, and most importantly allowed me to ditch city life for a quiet, tree-lined suburb in western Washington. Green Valley Estates seemed ideal. Modern houses on generous lots, bordered by endless forest. It was far enough out to feel calm, but not isolated. Sure, the HOA fees were steep of $450 every quarter, but the realtor assured me it was worth it for the pristine landscaping and immaculate community spaces. What she failed to mention was that the neighborhood was ruled by Evelyn Richardson, of the most power-hungry 38-year-old ever handed an HOA handbook. I met her during my second week. She rang my doorbell, holding a welcome basket filled with more HOA regulations than actual gifts. "We're thrilled to have new residents in Green Valley," she beamed, though the smile never quite reached her eyes. "I'm sure you'll really appreciate our community once you understand how it's run." That should have been my first red flag. Evelyn, with her perfect bob and designer leisure wear, was a senior manager at a top law firm, and she'd held the HOA presidency for 5 straight years. No one challenged her. I'd find out later why. They were too afraid. I kept to myself at first, paid my dues, trimmed my lawn to regulation height, and skipped the monthly HOA meetings, which according to my neighbor Sarah Johnson were more like Evelyn's personal courtroom than actual neighborhood get-togethers. Sarah, a 35-year-old elementary school teacher living 2 doors down, was one of the few genuinely kind people around. She'd show up with homemade cookies just because. "Don't let Evelyn get under your skin," she warned me early on. She can mean well, but in her mind, there's only one way to do things her way. Honestly, I probably would have flown under Evelyn's radar forever if not for my weekend hobby. I was raised in rural Montana, where my grandfather taught me how to hunt as soon as I could steady a rifle. It wasn't just a pasty meal, it was heritage, a quiet ritual I looked forward to. One weekend in October, I stumbled across a vast patch of forest just past the edge of our neighborhood, about 80 acres, complete with a flowing stream and dense cover, perfect for hunting season. Curious, I went to the county records office. The land was owned by Frank Williams, an 83-year-old man who had relocated to Florida years ago but still held a deed. I managed to find Frank's contact info and emailed him. I told him I was interested in hunting there and would treat the land with care. To my surprise, he replied the very next day. "Son, I've owned that land over 50 years," he wrote. "Used to farm some of the clearings with my family. Haven't been back in age as arthritis keeps me grounded. If you want to hunt, go ahead. Just treat the place right, and send a picture if you get a nice buck." What I didn't know at the time was that Evelyn and some other HOA board members had been using that land for their daily hikes. They'd built unofficial trails, put up bird feeders, and even installed benches without the owner's knowledge or consent. They'd basically adopted the land as their private reserve, even though they had no legal right to it. That detail would matter very soon. One crisp November morning, I headed out before sunrise with my gear. I set up in a clearing Frank had mentioned, settling in as the light crept through the trees. By mid-morning, an 8-point buck stepped into view. I took a clean shot. The deer went down instantly. As I approached to dress it, I heard voices approaching from one of the trails. Through the trees came Evelyn, leading 5 women dressed in high-end athletic wear, chatting about the latest neighborhood gossip. The moment she spotted me next to the deer, her expression twisted into horror. "What in the world are you doing?" she screamed, scrambling for her phone. "This area is protected. Who said you could just come here and kill animals?" I barely got a word out before she started snapping pictures and threatening to call the authorities. "This is barbaric," she declared to her wide-eyed crew. "And it goes completely against Green Valley's values of environmental care." I tried to explain that I had the owner's written permission, but she wasn't interested. She waved me off like I was a trespasser. "We oversee these nature trails," she snapped, "and hunting is absolutely forbidden." That was the moment I realized something bigger was happening. This hoe didn't just want to monitor my yard, they wanted to dictate my entire life. 3 days later, I came home to an envelope pinned to my door. Inside was an official-looking notice from the Green Valley Estates Association. I was being fined for inhumane hunting practices. The notice accused me of causing a community disturbance and demanded a $5,000 payment within 30 days. At first, I couldn't believe it. Then the anger hit. I knew enough about HOA rules to be certain they had no authority over activities that took place outside their jurisdiction, especially on private property where I had written permission from the actual owner. I called Sarah immediately. When I told her about the fine, she let out a long sigh. "That sounds like Evelyn," she muttered. "She's already been talking about it at school. You are being painted as some dangerous lunatic. Some parents are getting nervous or worried there's a threat in the neighborhood." Her voice dropped to a whisper even though we were on the phone. "Evelyn's been leading those Green Valley wellness walks through those woods for years. She even pitches them as a selling point when new people move in, exclusive access to private nature trails. I don't think she's ever bothered to check who legally owns that land." There was an home meeting the next evening, and I decided I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. When I showed up at the community center, the small meeting room was surprisingly packed. Evelyn sat confidently at the head of the table, flanked by Marcus Bennett, her loyal second-in-command who worked a government job but mostly acted like her personal echo. To her right was Richard Cooper, the 55-year-old treasurer, looking visibly uneasy. I recognized a handful of neighbors too, including Jessica Parker, who had a reputation for reporting every tiny HOA infraction like it was a federal crime. "Ah, Mr. Holloway has decided to grace us with his presence," Evelyn announced as I took a seat toward the back. "Perhaps you'd like to explain to the community why you believe it's acceptable to carry out violent acts in our neighborhood nature preserve?" It wasn't a question, it was a setup. I stood, calm and prepared, holding a folder of documents. "I'd be more than happy to clear a few things up," I said steadily. "First of all, I was hunting legally, with a valid license, on private land, a land whose owner gave me written permission to be there. Second, that land is not part of the HOA, nor is it some official neighborhood preserve. It belongs to a man named Frank Williams, who now lives in Florida." I placed printed copies of my hunting license and Frank's email correspondence on the table. "Lastly, the HOA has no legal authority to fine anyone for actions that happen off home-managed property. I've reviewed the bylaws thoroughly and nothing in them grants the board that kind of power." The room fell quiet. Richard Cooper picked up the documents and examined them carefully, his frown deepening. "He's got a point about jurisdiction, Evelyn," he said cautiously. "If this didn't happen on whole land, a broken bar." Evelyn cut him off sharply. "That's where you're wrong, Mason. Those trails have been a community fixture for over 10 years. We've maintained them, enhanced them, and our residents use them every single day. Whether or not some absentee owner's name is on the deed is irrelevant. This land is part of the Green Valley lifestyle." Marcus nodded eagerly. "And let's not ignore the safety issue. Having firearms so close to people's homes, especially with kids around?" That set off a chorus of concerned voices. Clearly, Evelyn's talking points had been circulating long before the meeting. Jessica Parker stood up, full of emotion. "I moved here because it was quiet and secure. Now I'm scared to let my kids play outside knowing armed men could be lurking in the woods." I tried to explain that I always followed strict safety rules and that hunting season had specific limits, but it didn't matter. They had already decided what they wanted to believe. Evelyn eventually called in Officer Mike Davis, a 45-year-old local cop who also lived in the neighborhood. When he arrived, he examined my hunting paperwork and gave a clear response. "As far as hunting laws go, he's in the clear," Officer Davis said. "And since he has written permission from the landowner, There's no trespassing involved either. This sounds like a civil dispute between the HOA and the landowner, not a criminal matter. That should have ended things, but Evelyn wasn't backing down. This isn't just about legality, Mike, she said coldly. It's about community values and ensuring everyone's safety. The HOA board has a responsibility to uphold those standards. The fine still stands. As the meeting wrapped up, Evelyn locked eyes with me and delivered her final warning. You have 30 days to pay the fine, Mr. Holloway. If you don't, we'll put a lien on your property and take legal steps. I didn't flinch. I won't be paying a fine that holds no legal ground, I told her firmly, and I suggest the board consult a real estate attorney before making any more baseless threats. As I turned to leave, something on the information table caught my eye, a glossy brochure titled Green Valley Trails. I flipped through it and felt a surge of disbelief. Frank's entire property was mapped out inside, labeled as Green Valley Nature Trails, with zero mention that the land was privately owned. That same night, I gave Frank Williams another call to bring him up to speed. He sounded both tired and irritated. I had no clue they were using my land like that, he said. I never gave anyone permission to build trails or put up anything. Broken bar benches, bird feeders, trails of the works. And the taxes just keep going up, Frank said, frustration in his voice. Honestly, I've been thinking about selling. Medical bills are piling up, and I could really use the cash. An idea sparked in my mind. I kept my tone casual. Frank, I said, if you're serious about selling a broken bar, I might be interested. What kind of price are you thinking? As we talked through the details, it hit me this might be the perfect chance to turn the tables on Evelyn and her precious hoe. Later that night, while digging deeper into property laws, I stumbled on something that left me stunned. Not only had the HOA been using Frank's land without permission, they were actively planning to turn it into their own so-called Evelyn Richardson Nature Park, all without informing or involving the actual owner. That revelation changed everything. While sifting through local public records, I found permit filings submitted by the HOA, blueprints for developing a community nature park on Frank's land. They'd submitted environmental reviews, applied for grants, and even organized fundraisers. All these a broken bar for land they didn't legally control. Attached to those documents were architectural mock-ups, paths, picnic areas, and a stone sign at the entrance boldly titled Evelyn Richardson Nature Park, a Green Valley Legacy. The entitlement was staggering. The next morning, I reached out to Amanda Louisa Sharp, experienced real estate attorney recommended by a colleague. She was in her early 40s and clearly knew her way around property law. After reviewing my pile of documents, she raised her eyebrows. This is highly irregular, she said with measured professionalism. What they've attempted here borders on claiming adverse possession of, but they haven't met the requirements. She explained that in Washington state, to claim adverse possession, they'd need to openly and continuously use the land without permission for at least 10 years and pay the property taxes. Which, from what you've told me, Mr. Williams has continued to do, she added. And this goes far beyond casual use. They're filing permits and fundraising? That's a massive overreach. When I told her I was thinking about buying the land myself, she smiled slightly. Now that would be a power move, she said. Let's make sure everything's done right. While Amanda got the legal gears turning, something strange started happening in the neighborhood. My garbage bins would mysteriously stay at the curb all day after pickup. Anonymous notes appeared under my windshield wipers. Animal killers aren't welcome in Green Valley. Neighbors who had once smiled and waved now avoided eye contact. Sarah called one evening with a quiet warning. I overheard Evelyn at the school PTA meeting. She told a group of parents to keep their kids away from that man on Maple Street. She's making you out to be some sort of threat to the neighborhood. The message couldn't be clearer: comply, or be cast out. While the silent hostility grew around me, I was deep in negotiations with Frank and Amanda to finalize the purchase of the 80-acre forest. Frank initially asked $800,000. Given his financial needs and the land's remoteness, we settled on $750,000. It wiped out most of my savings and a portion of the inheritance my grandparents had left me, but I saw it as more than a property purchase. It was peace of mind. Amanda fast-tracked the paperwork, and we locked in the closing date. During this period, the HOA fired off 3 more notices, one for improper garbage bin storage, one for unauthorized vehicle storage because I'd left my own truck in my own driveway for more than 24 hours while I was away on business, and another warning about the hunting violation at this time with added late fees. I followed Amanda's advice: document everything, but don't respond until the deal closed. Sarah kept me informed on what was happening behind the scenes. Evelyn's having closed-door meetings with some homeowners. She told me one night she's planning a big announcement about a new community initiative via some exclusive fundraiser. Minimum donation, $1,000. She also mentioned Evelyn had been cozying up to Daniel Thompson, a local councilman known for green-lighting development projects. That set off more alarm bells. Daniel Thompson was known for his political clout and quiet favoritism when it came to pushing through permits. His association with Evelyn suggested she was trying to grease the wheels for something big, likely tied to the land she didn't own. I also noticed Trevor Adams, Evelyn's husband, an architectural consultant, is surveying the wooded area with equipment. One afternoon, I saw him pacing the edge of the forest, clipboard in hand. When he noticed me watching, he abruptly packed up and left without a word. Turns out his firm, Green Vision Consulting, was listed as the lead designer on the proposed park project. It was obvious they were executing a carefully planned land grab, Evelyn's personal ego trip disguised as a community benefit. By the end of the week, they made their next move. Evelyn and Marcus showed up on my doorstep at this time with a formal legal notice in hand. If I didn't pay the growing total of finesse, now $5,700 including late fees, they would initiate legal action. "This is your final warning, Mason," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "We'd hate to escalate this, but the community standards must be preserved." Marcus stood silently behind her, arms folded like backup muscle. Marcus tried his best to look firm, but mostly came off as visibly uneasy. "The board has unanimously voted to pursue legal measures if you continue refusing to cooperate," he added stiffly. I nodded with a calm, polite expression. "I understand. You'll have my response within 48 hours. Evelyn raised a brow, caught off guard by my sudden willingness to comply, but she recovered quickly. "I'm glad you're finally coming to your senses," she said with a smug smile. "Perhaps now you're starting to grasp how we operate in Green Valley." If only she knew what I had in store. The next day, the purchase of Frank's 80-acre property was finalized. Amanda had rushed the paperwork, and by that afternoon, I had the deed in my hands, officially making me the sole owner of the very land Evelyn had been treating like her personal kingdom for years. That night, I barely slept. I knew that the next morning, when Evelyn showed up with her legal threats, I'd be ready with something that would shake the entire HOA to its core. Right on cue, the doorbell rang at 9 a.m. sharp. Evelyn stood on my porch, dressed immaculately in a blue blazer and white slacks, her hair perfectly set despite the light drizzle. Behind her was Marcus, clutching a leather folder, no doubt containing whatever lawsuit they'd prepared. "Good morning, Mason," she greeted crisply. "I assume you've had time to reflect on your stance regarding the HOA violations." Her tone made it clear she expected me to fold, her head tilted in that condescending way she'd perfected over the years. I gave her a warm smile and stepped aside. "I actually have something important to go over with both of you. Please, come in." Caught off guard by my friendliness, Evelyn walked in, doing her best to keep control of the moment. Marcus followed, clearly unsure of what was happening. Once they were seated in the living room, Evelyn immediately took command of the conversation. "Before you begin whatever argument you've come up with, you should know we've already submitted legal filings to the county regarding your violation," she said smoothly. "If you're willing to pay the full balance today, we can still pull the filing before it escalates." I leaned forward slightly, still composed. "That's interesting, but first, I think you'll want to take a look at this." I slid a folder across the coffee table. Inside was the deed for Frank Williams' 80-acre parcel, now legally in my name, along with a survey map that clearly outlined the property lines. "As of yesterday, I'm the legal owner of the land where the so-called A violation took place," I said evenly, "and I now also own all the land where the Green Valley HOA has been installing trails, benches, and planning unauthorized development without ever receiving permission from the rightful owner. Evelyn went pale. She snatched up the papers, flipping through them in disbelief, while Marcus leaned over her shoulder, his face shifting from confusion to concern. "There's a broken bar, this can't be real," Evelyn muttered. "The community has been using those trails for over 10 years. That gives us established rights of adverse possession." I calmly cut in. "My attorney has already reviewed that angle. You don't qualify. Not even close. You've never paid the taxes, never had any form of permission, and Mr. Williams was never once notified about your so-called development plans." I paused for emphasis, then continued, "In fact, we have documented proof that the HOA deliberately avoided contacting the actual landowner while drawing up plans and fundraising for the park. That opens the door to legal accusations of fraud and misrepresentation." Marcus tugged at his collar, visibly sweating. "Maybe we should consult legal counsel first." "A broken bar," he began. Evelyn cut him off with a sharp glare. "This changes nothing," she insisted, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "The community has established usage rights through ongoing maintenance and public access. The courts will recognize that." "You're welcome to make that argument in court," I replied calmly, "but until then, as the sole legal owner, I'm officially notifying the HOA that any and all activity on my property must stop immediately." I slid another paper across the table. "This is a cease and desist letter from my attorney. All benches, trails, bird feeders, and any other installations must be removed within 7 days. And you are to halt all fundraising and withdraw any permit applications related to this so-called park immediately." Evelyn shot to her feet, her composure crumbling. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she hissed. "I've built this neighborhood from the ground up. People respect my vision. One outsider with the deed isn't going to change that. The Unauthorized board is behind me 100%. I remained seated, locking eyes with her. "That may be, but the law is behind me, and unlike Unauthorized rules, real property law is enforceable by courts that don't answer to you." They left in a fury, Evelyn storming out, Marcus trailing behind like a scolded child. I watched from my window as they made a beeline across the street to Jessica Parker's house. Damage control had already begun. Moments later, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Emergency home meeting just got called." A community-wide emergency meeting had been announced for that evening, and the neighborhood was already buzzing. Word had spread quickly about my purchase of the hiking land. Evelyn was reportedly livid. By the afternoon, I had already arranged for private property and no trespassing signs to be installed along the boundary lines of my newly acquired land. A local contractor was scheduled to start placing them the very next day. While I was getting ready for the meeting, the doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't a board member or an Ibarra, it was Emily Chen, a 39-year-old journalist from the Valley Chronicle. "Mr. Holloway, I'm Emily Chen with the Valley Chronicle. We've received some interesting tips about a conflict involving you and the Green Valley HOA. Would you be willing to speak on the record?" Her direct approach was surprisingly refreshing, especially after months of dealing with subtle digs and passive-aggressive posturing from neighbors. I welcomed her and shared the situation, making sure to stick to the facts and avoid anything that could be considered slanderous. She took detailed notes, occasionally pausing in disbelief as I explained. "So let me get this straight, you bought the land through legal channels, and the HOA had been using it all this time without permission? And they were planning to name a public park after their president without ever reaching out to the owner?" She shook her head, stunned. "This is going to be quite the headline." Just before I headed out to the meeting, an older man approached my house cautiously. He introduced himself as Robert Jackson, a retired accountant in his mid-60s who'd lived in Green Valley for over 2 decades. "I need to speak with you privately," he said, glancing around nervously. "It's about Evelyn, a broken bar, and that land you just bought." Once inside, he opened up about his past involvement with the HOA. He had once served on the board during the time they discovered the land was not public after all. "Evelyn told us to forget about tracking down the actual owner," he confessed. "She said it would only complicate things, claimed that adverse possession would sort it out eventually." He said he resigned from the board not long after that conversation. I told her it wasn't right, but she's been running everything her own way ever since. He then alluded to something even more serious, potential mishandling of HOA funds. They've been collecting special assessments from residents for the last 3 years under the name of a trail improvement fund. It's a decent sum, but when I asked for a full accounting last year, I was told the details were confidential because of ongoing negotiations. This wasn't just neighborhood politics anymore. What Robert had revealed hinted at deeper issues of possibly financial misconduct on top of years of deception. As he stood to leave, he gripped my arm and looked me square inches the eye. "Watch your back," he warned. "Evelyn doesn't take defeat well. She and her husband have deep ties around here." His information didn't just reinforce my legal advantage, it handed me a potential game-changer, something that could bring Evelyn's long-standing rule over Green Valley Estates to a permanent end. The emergency meeting that night was exactly the spectacle I expected. The community center was overflowing, most faces I barely recognized, even though I'd lived in the neighborhood for 2 years. Evelyn took her position at the front, appearing composed on the surface, but a tightness in her expression gave away her frustration. "We've called this meeting to address an urgent matter that affects us all," she began, her voice practiced. "Mr. Holloway has purchased land that has served as our community's nature trails for more than 10 years. Now, he intends to deny access and erase years of volunteer work and beautification." Soft gasps and hushed voices swept through the audience as she spoke, casting me as the selfish newcomer who didn't understand community value as someone prioritizing personal gain over shared investment. Marcus stood at her side, nodding along solemnly at every word. Once her speech concluded, she handed the floor to her husband, Trevor Adams. He revealed glossy, full-color renderings of the proposed Evelyn Richardson Nature Park. There were pathways, a playground, even a miniature amphitheater for neighborhood events. "All of this is now at risk," Trevor said with gravity. "Years of planning, generosity, and dreams may be undone because one person refuses to stand with us." When I was finally allowed to respond, the room was thick with tension. "I understand why many of you are upset," I began, my tone steady, "but there are a few facts that need to be acknowledged. First, this land has always been privately owned. The previous owner was never contacted by the HOA before trails were cut or benches installed. Second, the park designs shown tonight were created without legal authority to use the land. And third, and this is most important, the fundraising for this park was based on a false premise. The HOA never owned the property." The reaction was immediate: confusion, frustration. Several residents began shouting, asking about their donations. Others accused me of ruining a beloved community resource. Amid the chaos, I noticed Nancy Roberts, the HOA's 42-year-old secretary, watching everything unfold. But unlike the rest, her face didn't reflect outrage, yet it was closer to dread. She avoided my gaze entirely. Meanwhile, Richard Cooper, the HOA treasurer, looked deeply unsettled. He was whispering nervously to Marcus and fumbling with a folder of papers. As the meeting spiraled into division and shouting, the truth had begun to cut through the surface, and it was only the beginning. As I stepped outside after the meeting, Sarah quietly approached me. "That was intense," she murmured, "but people are starting to talk. Some of the older homeowners are questioning the fundraising now. No one actually knows how much was collected or where the money even went." She glanced around cautiously. "I think Nancy might know something. She's been acting weird ever since the park project started. You should try speaking with her." In the days that followed, I watched my private property signs go up around the boundaries of the land. As expected, by the second day, several of them had either been torn down or damaged. Fortunately, I had already installed trail cameras in key areas. The footage clearly showed Marcus Bennett and other HOA board members creeping onto the property at night to rip the signs down. I saved the image as if they would serve a purpose later. But at the moment, I was more focused on uncovering the financial inconsistencies Robert had hinted at. With the help of Amanda Lewis, I submitted public records requests for all HOA financial transactions linked to the Nature Park initiative. While those were being processed, I reached out to Nancy Roberts. I used the sign vandalism as a reason to start the conversation. At first, she was hesitant, visibly nervous, but eventually agreed to meet in a quiet cafe tilde copyright a couple towns away, where she felt no one from the neighborhood would spot her. "I can't be seen with you," she said in a hushed voice as we sat down. Evelyn has ears everywhere. Nancy's confession was exactly what I needed. As the HOA secretary, she had unrestricted access to financial records including those connected to the Nature Park Development Fund. Over the past 3 years, she revealed, the fund had gathered more than $75,000 in resident contributions. The money does go into the HOA account, she said, but then Evelyn approves large payouts to a consulting firm, Green Vision Consulting, for things like design concepts and environmental analysis. The invoices are vague and don't go through the full board for approval. I asked the question I already had a sinking feeling about. Who owns Green Vision Consulting? Nancy sighed. Trevor Adams, Evelyn's husband, and Patricia Bennett is the other partner. Mark's sister. She went on to explain that no bidding process had been followed for any of the contracts. The justification? Specialized services that didn't require open procurement. Then she quietly slid a flash drive across the table. I've been making copies. I wanted to speak out before, but Evelyn made it clear that if I stirred things up, my job at the school district might be in danger. Her law firm represents the district, and she's close with the superintendent. With this new evidence in hand, I contacted Detective Alex Morgan, a seasoned financial crimes investigator from the county sheriff's office. After reviewing the material, he confirmed that there was enough to justify a formal investigation into possible embezzlement and misuse of funds. This isn't a simple neighborhood feud anymore, he told me. If they knowingly collected donations for a project on land they didn't own and funneled those funds into a company owned by board members' relatives, that's crossing into criminal territory. While the investigation quietly got underway, Evelyn launched a more aggressive campaign against me. One morning, a small group showed up outside my home holding signs with slogans like "Protect Our Rails" and "Community Before Greed." Neighborhood forums and social media pages lit up with posts questioning my motives, my integrity, or even my background. Then things got personal. Sarah called to let me know her school principal had taken her aside. Apparently, they were concerned about her continued association with a resident causing controversy and subtly mentioned her upcoming contract review. Meanwhile, Emily Chen's article was published in the Valley Chronicle. It provided a fair overview but didn't shy away from asking tough questions, especially about the fundraising practices and the HOA's legal authority over the land. The next day, I received a certified letter from the HOA's legal counsel. The letter accused me of defamation and demanded $100,000 in damages, claiming that my statements had harmed the reputation of the Green Valley Estates Association and its leadership. The financial concerns I'd raised were described as deliberate lies meant to distract from my supposed misconduct. Later that evening, Detective Morgan called me unexpectedly. "We've got initial bank records," he told me. "In the last 3 years, Green Vision Consulting has received $68,000 from the HOA's development fund. They only have one client at the HOA, and their invoices are padded. What they're charging should cost a third of that." He paused. "We're proceeding with the investigation. Just thought you should know." At the next HOA gathering, Evelyn's demeanor was tense but unshaken. She stuck to her strategy, raising her voice to rally the room. "We will not be bullied by false accusations," she declared to the crowd. "Mr. Holloway is simply trying to shift blame for his own misconduct by dragging the names of good people through the mud, the people who have given years to this community." Her performance was sharp, but the cracks in her carefully built foundation had already started to show. "Rest assured, the board will defend itself vigorously against these baseless attacks," Evelyn announced with firm resolve. But I wasn't the only one catching the subtle shift in the room as several residents were exchanging uneasy glances. The illusion of unity was unraveling, and Evelyn clearly sensed it. Without missing a beat, she switched her approach. Fixing her cold eyes on me from across the room, she said sharply, "You've made a grave mistake, Mason. When this is over, it won't be just a lost argument. You'll regret ever coming to Green Valley." "I'll make sure of that." Her public threat, made in full view of dozens of residents, was the final straw. As I stepped out of the meeting, I knew it was time to stop defending myself and go on the offensive. What Evelyn didn't know was that within a day, the tables would turn and it wouldn't be me facing fallout. It would be her. The next morning, I invited Emily Chen over to my home for an exclusive, off-the-record interview. When she arrived, I laid everything out, documentation of the financial records, proof of payments to Green Vision Consulting, company registration papers showing Trevor Adams and Patricia Bennett as owners, and promotional materials misleadingly stating the HOA had full rights to develop the land. I also included statements from both Frank Williams and Robert Jackson confirming that the HOA had intentionally avoided contacting the landowner. Then came the audio of Evelyn's threat from the previous night and testimonies from witnesses who heard it loud and clear. Emily's eyes widened as she sifted through the files. "This is a lot," she said, clearly taken aback. "And Detective Morgan is already involved?" I nodded. "He's treating it as a financial crimes case, not just a neighborly feud. I believe he's interviewing board members today." Emily promised a full article would be published in the next day's paper, but she'd post a digital preview that evening, a perfect timing for the emergency home meeting Evelyn had scheduled to discuss legal strategies for addressing defamatory claims. While Emily focused on her piece, Amanda and I moved on to the next phase. We drafted a letter addressed to every homeowner in Green Valley. The letter broke everything down: how their donations had been misused, how the board funneled funds to a company connected to its members, and how trail camera footage showed HOA officials trespassing and vandalizing my property. I also included a comprehensive breakdown comparing how much was raised for the park fund versus how much was paid to Green Vision Consulting. The letter closed with a proposal: I would donate a portion of my land for a properly maintained and insured community trail on the condition that the current HOA leadership resigned and new transparent governance policies were adopted. By late afternoon, news had spread quickly. A Detective Morgan had been seen visiting the homes of Richard Cooper and Nancy Roberts, presumably collecting official statements. Several neighbors mentioned receiving urgent calls from Evelyn, begging them to attend the meeting to stand united against attacks on the community. But her hold on the neighborhood was unraveling. John Peterson, a retired banker who had contributed $5,000 to the park effort, was now openly calling other residents, furious about how the money had been managed. Even Cynthia Miller, once one of Evelyn's staunchest allies, announced she was calling for a full audit of all HOA financial activity. That evening's meeting was unlike anything Green Valley had ever witnessed. The community center overflowed as residents filled every seat, stood along the walls, and spilled into the parking lot outside. Evelyn walked in with Trevor and Marcus at her side, all three of them looking rattled but determined. She tried to bring the meeting to order, but was immediately met with a barrage of shouted questions. "Is it true you directed HOA funds to your husband's company?" Someone called out. "Why didn't you tell us the HOA didn't own the land?" Another demanded. Evelyn raised her voice to speak over the noise. "These are all lies," she snapped. "Mason Holloway is spreading misinformation to create chaos. Green Vision Consulting has provided legitimate services, fully approved by the board. The fact that my husband is involved doesn't affect the quality of work done." That only fueled more skepticism. "You never disclosed any of that," Richard Cooper suddenly interjected. The room fell into brief silence as everyone turned to look at him. "I signed off on those payments because you assured me everything was above board," he said. As the atmosphere grew increasingly tense, District Attorney William Hayes entered the room with Detective Morgan quietly at his side. They didn't speak as they didn't need to. Their presence said enough. Evelyn noticed them immediately. Her composure cracked. "This is absurd," she snapped, slamming her hand against the podium. "Everything I've done, everything it has been for this community. Maybe I cut a few corners, but it was all to make the park a reality. What would you rather have? Some gun-toting outsider controlling our access to nature?" For a moment, the room fell silent. Then Nancy Roberts stood up from her seat at the back. Her voice was calm, but firm. "That's not true, Evelyn, and you know it." Her voice was shaky, but her resolve was firm. "You hid the truth about who owned the land. You pushed the board into approving payments to Trevor's firm without proper checks, and when I questioned the invoices, you threatened my job." She paused, eyes locked on Evelyn. "This wasn't for the good of the community. It was about building a personal legacy using everyone else's money." The room exploded. Dozens of residents began shouting at once, many demanding Evelyn's immediate resignation. Marcus tried to come to her defense, but it was half-hearted. He didn't seem convinced himself. Trevor stood silently, looking pale and stunned as the carefully built narrative around his wife began to collapse. Then District Attorney Hayes stepped forward. Calmly, but with authority, he approached the podium. In light of the active investigation, he said, addressing everyone present, it would be wise for the association to consider appointing interim leadership until the situation is resolved. But Evelyn wasn't ready to back down. I will not be stepping aside, she declared, her eyes blazing as she looked around the room. These are baseless smears, and anyone spreading them will be added to our lawsuit. This community needs strong leadership now more than ever. I will not walk away just because of one angry resident's obsession. With that, she collected her things and stormed out, Trevor and Marcus rushing after her. As the room gradually emptied, neighbors approached me, some offering apologies, others asking questions or showing support. Sarah, who had been filming everything on her phone, gave me a thumbs up across the room. Emily Chen, who had quietly entered during the commotion, was already interviewing residents for a follow-up to her first article. District Attorney Hayes and Detective Morgan pulled me aside. We'll need a formal statement from you at the sheriff's office, Hayes said quietly. This has escalated far beyond HOA politics. We're looking at possible charges of wire fraud, misuse of funds, and abuse of authority. We're treating it with the seriousness it deserves. Later that night, I received a text from an unknown number. Storage unit at Valley Self-Storage, Unit 23, being cleared out tonight. Documents being moved. Thought you should know. I immediately contacted Detective Morgan. He thanked me and said he'd take action. By morning, I got word that officers had intercepted Trevor Adams and Patricia Bennett at the unit, caught trying to remove several boxes of financial documents. A last-ditch effort to destroy evidence. One that only strengthened the case against them. Evelyn had once threatened to destroy me, but now it was her life unraveling, and by her own doing. Still, she had one more reckless move left. 2 days later, she launched it. Through emails and social media, Evelyn announced what she called a community trail preservation walk, a mass trespass on my land, masked as a neighborhood event. Join your neighbors in reclaiming our beloved trails. The message read, bring your kids, your grandparents, your cameras. Show Mason Holloway he can't steal what belongs to us. It was a stunt, an attempt to paint me as the villain. One man standing in the way of families trying to enjoy the outdoors. But I saw it coming. And I was ready. First, I alerted Detective Morgan and the sheriff's office. Then, with Amanda Lewis's help, I had my land legally designated as a private wildlife reserve, complete with permits, tax documentation, and protections. We installed a stronger perimeter fence with clear conservation signage and warnings of legal penalties for trespassing. I even added an entry gate and an information kiosk outlining the protected status of the property. On Saturday morning, I stood at that gate, camera in hand, Amanda by my side. Right on cue, Evelyn arrived, leading about 30 people. They waved signs reading "Trails for All." She wore brand new hiking gear and carried a walking stick she clearly didn't know how to use. She paused at the fence, then began her performance. "This is outrageous," she said loudly for the cameras. "These trails have belonged to us for decades. These fences are illegal, and we're here to reclaim our rights." She moved toward the gate, but before she could touch it, 3 patrol cars pulled up. Deputies stepped out, led by Detective Morgan. "Good morning," he addressed the group. "This land is privately owned. The property owner has reported previous incidents of trespassing and vandalism. Anyone crossing this boundary may be subject to arrest." He turned to Evelyn. "Mrs. Richardson, organizing this event may be considered further evidence in the ongoing investigation." Evelyn's face flushed deep red. "This is nonsense." "Marcus, say something." But Marcus had already stepped back, not eager to challenge law enforcement. Others followed, quietly heading back to their cars as the threat of arrest sank in. "You're all just walking away?" Evelyn called out, her voice breaking. "After everything I've done?" That phrase, "everything I've done," sounded very different now. Now that everyone knew what it really meant, her crowd dwindled to only a handful of loyal followers, who eventually left as well after calm but firm intervention from the deputies. As Evelyn made her way to her car, she turned toward me with a venomous glare. "This isn't over," she spat, but her words carried no weight anymore. Emptied of authority and stripped of influence, The days that followed were packed with new revelations. Testimonies from Nancy Roberts and Richard Cooper, along with the files retrieved from the storage unit, proved damning. Formal charges were brought against Evelyn, Trevor, and Patricia: fraud, embezzlement, and the misappropriation of HOA funds. The amount misused totaled over $68,000, money spent on personal luxuries like vacations and home upgrades. In an emergency meeting, the HOA board was officially dissolved. Sarah Johnson was elected interim president by unanimous support. Her first action: launch a complete financial audit and put in place strict regulations for transparency and accountability. The rest of the former board issued public apologies both to me and to the community for allowing Evelyn's actions to go unchecked. Richard Cooper stepped down, admitting he had never verified the financial decision she pushed through. Meanwhile, I fulfilled my promise. On a portion of my land, with the proper approvals and planning, I developed a legitimate public trail. I named it the Frank Williams Memorial Trail, in honor of the land's original owner. A commemorative plaque was installed, telling his story and urging visitors to honor both the natural environment and private ownership. Evelyn and her inner circle all accepted plea deals to avoid a trial. Each received probation, suspended sentences, and were ordered to repay more than $100,000 combined. Additionally, they were barred from managing any nonprofit or HOA for a decade. Soon after, they sold their home and slipped quietly out of Green Valley, their reputations in tatters. The next home meeting I attended had a completely different atmosphere. Under Sarah's leadership, the tone had shifted from control to cooperation. When a new agreement was proposed allowing access to my land with proper insurance and conservation oversight, it passed without a single objection. "Now this," Sarah said with a smile, "this is what real community feels like." As I walked back home, I reflected on everything we'd been through. I still enjoy hunting on my land at this time with the full support and respect of my neighbors. The HOA still exists, but now its purpose is clear: to serve, not to dominate. As for the $75,000 Evelyn repaid at my suggestion, it was used to start a scholarship fund for students pursuing studies in ethics and leadership. Sometimes, it takes losing something to realize what it was meant to be. The HOA lost control but gained integrity, and me, I found something far more valuable than land: a true sense of community. And Evelyn? Last I heard, she's renting an apartment, a broken bar with no HOA to speak of. Poetic, really. Still thinking about the twists and turns of all this? Yeah, us too. Hit subscribe and come unravel more madness within a drama nest.